Ayan. Okay. Chapter 12, Completing the Audit. Basahin lang natin yung introduction. The standard audit procedures to be performed to wrap up an audit engagement include the following. Una, identify and evaluate potential contingencies and commitments which may have an effect on financial statements. Ito, pinag-aaralan mo sa ano to, no? Sa FinAct. Okay. Contingencies and commitments, ito yan. Identify and evaluate contingencies and commitments. Number 2, perform subsequent events procedures. Okay. So, dito naman yan. Perform subsequent event procedures. Next, review reasonableness of management's assessment of the use of the going concern assumption. Okay. Going concern, ito yan. Then, identify related parties and perform procedures to test related party transactions. Related parties and test related party transactions. Dito naman yan sa baba. O yun, related parties and related party transactions. Then, ito, obtain management representation letter. O, ito, medyo naririnig-rinig mo na to, no? Yung nung mga earlier chapters natin. Ano ba yung management representation letter talaga? Okay, dito naman yan, pag-uusapan, management representation letter. Ayan, ang kati ng lalamunan ko. Pasensya na. Then last, other procedures as may be deemed necessary. Okay, naka-enumerate din yan dito sa baba. Other procedures. Okay. Tara, isa-isayin na natin. Ano ba yung ginagawa dito sa completion stage? Una nga dyan, identify and evaluate contingencies and commitments. Siyempre, puruan muna to, no? Definition of terms. Pero alam mo naman na yung mga yan. Provision is a liability of uncertain amount or timing, though its existence is beyond doubt. Uncertain lang yung amount or timing, pero yung existence niya is beyond doubt. O yung highly probable. Ano. Next, contingent liability. Okay, isa possible, ito possible pa lang, obligation that arises from past events and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the enterprise. Contingent asset, possible pa rin na asset. Okay, possible lang. Hindi siya probable. That arises from past events and whose existence will be confirmed only by occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the enterprise. Then, commitment, okay, represents future cash flow requirements. Okay, o yung mga example nito, purchase commitments, ganyan. Okay, ano ba ang ginagawa natin dito? For contingencies and commitments, ayan, nakalatag dyan, yung mga procedures na pwedeng gawin. Andyan ulit, inquiry with management regarding possible transactions that qualify for recognition. Read the permanent file of the client and review related documents. Read correspondence and communication files of the client. Review minutes of meetings of BOD and of meetings of shareholders for possible lawsuits and contingencies. Okay, meron kasing mga ano dyan, no, discussion. Okay, ng mga ganitong bagay. So, kailangan i-review mo rin yung minutes na yan. Panglima, send ng confirmation letter with legal counsel. Ano ba? Sumunod ka naman. Ayan. And inspect replies of any pending litigation or contingent liabilities. Okay. Where legal confirmation letters have been sent at an interim date, determine whether updated legal letters are required for the remaining period under audit. Okay. So, baka kasi nag-send tayo ng bago yung year-end, no? Or bago yung Audit report date. Okay, so baka may need tayong mag-resend na confirmation letters, baka may mga bagong litigations or kung ano man. Okay, determine whether updated legal letters are required for remaining period under audit. Okay, pang-anim, test the professional fees account. Okay, so dito naman ang titingnan mo yung ah, account, okay, ng professional fees do sa records ni client. So halimbawa merong mga may line item do sa books ni client na professional fees. Okay, ayan. Tapos titingnan mo yan, ino-note mo baka may mga legal expenses. Bakit? Ano bang kinalaman nito sa contingencies? Siyempre, 'di ba kapag ganyan, ah, may mga binabayaran tayong mga abogado, baka kasi meron tayong mga litigations nga. Okay, so kaya tinitingnan natin 'yan. Test the professional fees account, noting any legal expenses incurred and reviewing documents supporting such expenses. Okay, puwede rin baka biglang may mga legal fees ano. Halimbawa last year wala naman, tapos this year biglang mayroon. So ano kayang ibig sabihin nito? Baka may mga nagsampa ng kaso dun sa client natin. Okay, so te-test natin nga 'yan. Next, test the reasonableness of any accounting estimates. Okay. Then review current file and the results of other procedures for indications of contingencies and commitments. Then read new items related to the company. Okay. So next natin, perform subsequent event procedures. Okay. Events after the balance sheet date are known as subsequent events. Alam mo na yan. Okay, pinag-aaralan to sa FinAct. Okay. So events after the balance sheet date, okay, wala lang yung date na word, no? Are known as subsequent events. PSA 560 redrafted requires auditor to obtain sufficient uh, appropriate evidence. So itong PSA 560, ang title niyan ano na, subsequent events. Yun pala no, take note mo rin yung mga titles na to. Baka kasi baka lang may matanong sa mga departmental exams nyo. What is the title of PSA 560? So mas maganda kung alam mo rin siya. Subsequent events. Ganyan. Yan, makikita mo naman yan sa libro mo or kung wala kang book, pwede mo lang i-search list ng mga PSAs. Okay, para lang at least alam mo yung mga titles nito. Okay, alam ko namang marami kang binabasa ngayon. Kaya hindi na natin binasa ng buo itong mga PSAs na yan. Ayan, meron naman tayong libro, and kaya nga nandyan si libro. Summarize na niya yan eh. Tapos in-arrange niya na para mas madali nating maintindihan bilang students. Okay, pero kung ikaw, kung interested ka, pwede naman, available naman yan sa internet. Hanapin mo. PSA 560, redrafted. Okay, may makikita ka dyan PDF file. Print mo, tapos hindi mo naman babasahin, no? Eh, hindi. Ayan. Pero kasi ganun yung ginawa ko dati, no? Parang, ayan, nag-print yung may iba kong classmates nitong mga PSAs. So, nakigaya ako. Pero, ako, hindi ko siya nabasa. Kasi nga, marami tayong ginagawa. Ano, maraming kumakain ng oras natin ngayong undergrad. Ayan. Kung may libro naman, libro na lang. Okay, ayun lang. Suggestion ko lang naman. Pero, syempre, nasa sarili mo pa rin diskarte yan. Okay, PSA 560, o yung subsequent events nga, requires auditor to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence that all events up to the date of the auditor's report, ayan, date of the auditor's report, that may require adjustment of or disclosure in the financial statements have been identified. Okay. So take note mo all events up to the date of auditor's report. Okay, hindi ng balance sheet data. Okay. That may require adjustment of or disclosure in the financial statements have been identified. Then ito, procedures ulit to identify subsequent events. Ayan, self-explanatory din naman to. Basahin natin. Obtain an understanding of any procedures management has established to ensure that subsequent events are identified. Inquiry with management as to whether any subsequent events have occurred which might affect the financial statements. Andiyan na naman si inquiry. Okay. Then, reading minutes of meetings with shareholders, BOD, and audit and executive committees held after period end. Okay, minutes of meetings ulit. Baka may ma-identify ka dyan. Subsequent events. Reading the entity's latest available interim financial statements. Okay. Budgets, cash flow forecast, and other related management reports. Okay, interim to, no? Kasi nga, subsequent events na tayo. So, limbawa, yung year-end natin, sige, mag-drawing tayo ng timeline. Dito na lang. Ito yung, kunwari, 2020. Itong FS ng 2020, yan yung ino-audit natin. Okay, tapos, syempre, yung date of auditor's report, somewhere dito pa, no, 2021. So, limbawa, siguro mga March 2021. Okay. So, yung sinasabi dito na interim financial statements, yung latest available interim financial statements, dito na yan sa 2021. Baka kasi meron ng monthly, baka kasi monthly, nagpe-prepare yung client mo ng, ano, no, ng FS. So, meron ka ng January, February, March. So, meron ka ng first quarter na interim financial statement. So, pwede mo yung buklatin. No? Baka may ma-identify ka na subsequent events. Okay? Yan. Clarify lang natin kasi baka isipin mo dito pa nagpe-pertain yung interim financial statement sa 2020 pa. Hindi. Dito na yun sa 2021. Kasi nga, ano ba yung topic natin? Completing the audit. Mga ginagawa natin to wrap up the audit engagement. Okay, ibig sabihin, tapos na dito, no? Okay. Tapos na yung period under audit. So, yung interim financial statements is nagpe-pertain dun sa susunod na taon. Okay? Ayan. Number 5. Inquiry with entities lawyers concerning litigations and claims. So, ito, lawyers na naman. Inquiry na naman. The last, inquiry with management as to whether any subsequent events have occurred which might affect financial statements. Oh, ito rin yun eh. Inquiry with management as to whether subsequent events have occurred which might affect financial statements. Okay, paulit-ulit ah. Ayan. Then, when a component is audited by another auditor, the auditor would consider the other auditor's procedures regarding the events after period end and the need to inform the other auditor of the planned date of the auditor's report. Okay, upon becoming aware of events which materially affect the financial statements, auditors should consider whether such events are properly accounted for and adequately disclosed in the financial statements. So ito yung terms na paulit-ulit na nababanggit, no? Properly accounted for and disclosed in the FS. Okay, there are 3 major time periods involved in considering subsequent events. Una, from balance sheet up to the date of the auditor's report. So ito yun. From balance sheet date. O yung, ayan yung drawing natin dito ngayon lang. Okay, tapos from the date of the auditor's report to the date of FS issuance. So kung kailan na-issue, sabihin natin na-issue siya April. Ayan, yan naman yung second na time period. Then, from the FS issuance onwards. Ay, dito naman. Ay, sumobra. Okay. Ayan. Pero ito, may discussion pa na mas malalim sa next chapter natin. No, yung auditor's report. Audit report. Okay. Ayan. So, yun yung pangalawang ginagawa dito, no? Alam bakit? Ayan. Sa ating wrap-up procedures o sa completion stage. Tapos na tayo sa contingencies and commitments, subsequent events. Pangatlo na, going concern. Okay. And professional standards require an overall evaluation of the entity's ability to continue as a going concern for the period of 1 year from the reporting date. This evaluation relates to the viability of the entity, not just whether its assets are recoverable and its liabilities are properly classified. So bakit ba concern natin ito? Kasi yung mga financial statements, oh, 'di ba kung nakabasa ka man ng FS, nakalagay doon, no, ah, na prepared yung FS under the going concern assumption. Ibig sabihin, sa foreseeable future, nakikita pang mag-e-exist yung company. Okay. Ayan. Ano ba ang opposite ng going concern? Yung quitting concern, ano? Yung, ibig sabihin, ah, maliit na yung chance na or nakikita na mag-e-end yung operations ng isang company. Okay. Nung pinrepare niya yung FS niya under quitting concern assumption. Ayan. Okay. Sige, basahin natin to. When there is a history of profitable operations, okay, palitan nga natin ito ng highlighter. Profitable operations and the ready access to financial records, management may make its assessment without detailed analysis. Ibig sabihin, kung kumikita naman yung company, profitable naman yung operations, tapos mayroon siyang, pag sinabing ready access to financial resources, merong mga line of credit, no? Pinapautang naman siya ng mga bangko, may mga investor siya. So, malamang sa malamang na magtutuloy-tuloy pa yung operations ng company. Okay? So, kaya hindi na kailangan ng detailed analysis. Going concern yan. Malamang. Okay? Management's assessment of the going concern assumption involves making a judgment about the future outcome of events or conditions which are inherently uncertain. Okay, the following factors are relevant. Degree of uncertainty associated with the outcome of an event increases significantly. Ito, self-explanatory din naman. When making a future judgment about the outcome of an event or condition. Any judgment about the future is based on the information available at the time at which the judgment is made. Okay. The size and complexity of the entity, the nature and condition of its business, and the degree to which it is affected by external factors all affect the judgment regarding the outcome of events or conditions. Ayan. So ito, may examples of events which may give rise to business risk and doubts as to the going concern assumption. Okay. Ayan. So nakalist dyan, net liability or net current liability position, fixed term borrowings approaching maturity without realistic prospects of renewal or repayment. Okay. Excessive reliance on short-term borrowings to finance long-term assets. Okay. Indications of withdrawal of financial support by debtors and other creditors. So ito, ibig sabihin lang, may doubt na, no? Baka mawala na yung financial resources. Baka mawala na yung mga nagpapautang o mga uh, nag-i-invest. Okay. Negative operating cash flows. Adverse key financial ratios. Then substantial operating losses or significant deterioration in value. Arrears or discontinuance of dividends. So kapag hindi na nakapagbayad ng dividends para dun sa mga shareholders niya, indication din yan, no? Okay. Na baka may doubts na. Okay, as to the going concern assumption. Next, inability to pay creditors on due dates. Inability to comply with terms of loan agreements. Yan, mga self-explanatory naman. Change from credit to cash on delivery transactions. Ito, paano to naging indication, no? Excuse me. Ito, paano kaya siya naging indication na meron tayong doubt sa going concern? Okay, 'di ba kapag nagso-solve ka ng problems, halimbawa sa FAR mo, sa FAR subject, kadalasan nakikita mo, no, on account lagi kapag bumibili yung mga company. Okay, kasi gano'n talaga sa actual practice. Hindi naman bigla maglalabas na lang ng cash, okay, para magbayad dun sa mga supply. Okay. So ganito yung setup sa totoong buhay, ano. May mga supplier na papautangin yung company, tapos si company magbabayad na lang when the credit term expires or kung gustong maka-avail ng discount period, siyempre magbabayad ng mas maaga. Okay? Pagka ganito na naging, cash on delivery na yung transaction, ibig sabihin magbabayad na agad yung company upon the arrival of the supplies. Ano kaya ibig sabihin nun? Ibig sabihin wala ng tiwala yung supplier 'no, na makakabayad yung company. Okey, kaya ayaw niya ng pautangin. "Uy, hindi ka nakakabayad, may history ka na failure to, pay your creditors." Okey, kaya mag-cash on delivery tayo. Okey, ayan. So yun, indication din na may doubts na sa going concern. Inability to obtain financing, okey, ulit-ulit tayo diyan. Loss of key management without replacement, ito hindi naman na financial ano, key management na, okey, without replacement. Loss of a major market, franchise license or principal supplier. Then labor difficulties or shortages of important supplies, non-compliance with capital or other statutory requirements, pending legal or regulatory proceedings against entity. Then changes in legislation or government policy expected to adversely affect the entity. Okay, 'di ba? Sobrang ano lang naman, madali lang naman intindihin. Baka may doubts na nga na makakapagpatuloy pa ba yung company. Ayan. So dito, auditor's responsibility regarding going concern. Auditors are not required to design audit procedures solely to detect going concern problems. Take note mo 'to, Hindi natin 'yan, responsibility 'no. Hindi tayo required to design audit procedures para lang ma-detect, yung, problems or yung issues regarding going concern assumption. If conditions or events create substantial doubt as to the ability to continue as a going concern, the auditor should consider whether management has plans for and the ability to implement alternative means of maintaining adequate cash flows. Okay. Yan. Take note mo yung unang bullet point, hindi tayo required to design audit procedures para lang ma-identify nga yung going concern problems. So nag-o-audit lang tayo. Okay, and sa pag-audit natin, meron tayong mga nakikitang indications na, uy, baka hindi na patuloy itong company, baka may ano na 'to 'no, baka dapat quitting concern na siya. Okay. The management's plans and ability to implement alternative means of maintaining adequate cash flows. So ito yung mga puwedeng gawin ng management. Magbenta ng asset, mag-renew or mag-extend ng loans. Okay, reduction or disposal of operations producing negative cash flows. Obtaining new equity capital and reduction in dividend payments. Okay. So yun lang para dito sa going concern. Next natin, okay, related parties naman. Identify related parties. Okay, and related party transactions. The auditor should perform audit procedures designed to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence regarding identification and disclosure by management of related parties and the effect of related party transactions that are material to the financial statements. Ito, management's responsibility, identification and disclosure of related parties and transactions with such parties. Okay, so si management ang responsible dyan. Auditor's responsibility. Auditor needs to have knowledge of entity's business and industry to enable himself to identify events, transactions, and practices that have a material effect on the financial statements. Okay, ito. Procedures to check completeness of client-provided information regarding related parties. Ayan, procedures na naman, ano? Okay. Review prior year working papers for names of unknown related parties. Review entities' procedures for identification of related parties. Inquire as to the affiliation of directors and officers with other entities. Review shareholder records to determine names of principal shareholders. Okay. Ayan. So ito nga yung shareholders, para makita mo yung ano no, yung majority ng mga shareholders. Kami ang hinihingi namin nun is yung GIS o General Information Sheet. Pero yun nga, in actual practice naman, makikita mo yan. Then ito review, ito ulit, minutes of meetings na naman of shareholders and the BOD. Tas inquiry ulit of other auditors currently involved in the audit or predecessor auditors as to their knowledge of additional related parties. Okay. Then ito, review the entity's income tax returns and other information supplied to regulatory agencies. Ayan. Transactions with related parties. When obtaining an understanding of the accounting and internal control systems and making a preliminary assessment of control risk, the auditor should consider the adequacy of control procedures over the authorization and recording of related party transactions. Okay. See, ito. Examples of unusual transactions which may indicate existence of previously unidentified related parties. Ayan. Transactions with which have abnormal terms of trade, transactions which lack an apparent logical business reason for occurrence, transactions in which substance differs from form, transactions processed in an unusual manner, high volume or significant transactions with certain customers or suppliers as compared with others, then yung unrecorded transactions. Yan, bakit ba parang ano 'no, parang big deal yung, related party transactions? Ito 'no, personal experience ko sa mga client ko noon nung nag-audit pa ako. Meron kasing mga related parties na nagtataguan, okey, ng mga transactions or meron naman mga nag-o-overstate ng transactions. Halimbawa, gustong ipakita nung isang entity na malaki yung sales niya. Okay. So, palalabasin na merong customer na umo-order sa kanya, okay. When in reality, yung customer pala na yun is related party niya, okey. Tapos hindi dinisclose na related party pala yun. So, ang iisipin ng magbabasa ng financial statements, "Uy, aba, okay yung sales nitong company na 'to, ah." Oh, eh, yun pala related party lang yung bumibili, okey. So, yun kaya mahalaga na dapat related party transactions, ma-identify yung related parties, ma-disclose. Okay? Ayan, para yung FS natin ay fairly presented. During the course of the audit, the auditor carries out procedures which may identify the existence of transactions with related parties. Examples include the following. Perform detailed TOC. Ano to? Hindi pala. Detailed test of transactions and balances. TOD pala to. Review minutes of meetings, review accounting records, review confirmations of loans receivable and payable, and confirmations from banks, and review investment transactions. Okay. Ayan. Sige. Ayan, baka may question ka pala so far up to dito sa related party transactions. Unmute ka lang pag may question ka. Ayan. Wait lang. Okay, mukhang wala namang tanong, no? Tara, tuloy natin dito. Management representation letter. Ayan. Mhm. Yan. Obtain management representation letter. Yan ulit, may PSA title ulit dyan. PSA 580. Dito pala sa going concern, nabanggit ba? PSA 570? Hindi. Ayan. Pero yun nga, note mo, PSA 570, going concern yan. Ang title niyan, going concern. Okay. Dito naman sa related party, PSA 550, related parties. Okay. Then ito, yung sa representation letter. PSA 580, written representations naman yung title niyan. PSA 580. Written representation. Okay. Ayan, baka lang kasi matanong din sa'yo. Yun. Pero yun nga, pwede mo naman i-search sa internet yung list ng mga PSAs. Kung wala, libro. Tara, PSA 580 revised. Okay, and redrafted. The auditor shall request written representations from management with appropriate responsibilities for the financial statements and knowledge of the matters concerned. A written representation is a statement by management provided to the auditor to confirm certain matters or to support other audit evidence. Okay. Yan. Tapos, acknowledgement made by management of its responsibility for the financial statements. Auditor should obtain evidence that management acknowledges its responsibility for the fair presentation of the FS in accordance with relevant financial reporting framework. Okay. Then ito, representations by management as audit evidence. The auditor should obtain written representations nga, when other sufficient appropriate evidence cannot reasonably be expected to exist. The possibility of misunderstandings between the auditor and management is reduced when oral representations are confirmed by management in writing. Ito alam mo na rin naman. During the course of audit, management makes many representations to the auditor, either unsolicited or in response to specific inquiries. When such representations related to matters which are material to the FS, the auditor will need to seek corroborative audit evidence from sources inside or outside the entity. Kapag take note mo yung representation ay material. Okay. Kailangan ng corroborative audit evidence. Next, evaluate whether representations made by management appear reasonable and consistent with other evidence obtained. And consider whether individuals making representations can be expected to be well informed on the particular matters. Representations by management cannot be a substitute. I-take note mo rin to, no? Hindi siya pwedeng substitute for other audit evidence that the auditor could reasonably expect to be available. Okay. Kung kaya naman no na ni auditor na mag gather ng ibang audit evidence, sige gather ka. Okay. Sabi kasi dito, the auditor should obtain written representations from management when other sufficient appropriate evidence cannot reasonably be expected to exist. Pero kung meron naman, kuhanin mo. Okay? Yan. In certain cases, representation by management may be the only audit evidence which can reasonably be expected to be available. Yan nga. Baka yun lang yung available na audit evidence. Pwede ba itong palitan ng kulay? Ayun. If a representation by management is contradicted by other audit evidence, the auditor should investigate the circumstances and reconsider the reliability of other representations. Okay? So, kung makita mo na yung isang representation, hindi siya nag-agree doon sa ibang audit evidence. So, magkakaroon ka na rin ng doubts para doon pa sa ibang representations na ginawa ni management. Okay, kaya nga tayo masyado tayong concerned doon sa integrity ni management. Okay, baka hindi tayo dapat magtiwala doon sa mga representations niya. Ito, documentation of representations by management. The auditor would ordinarily include in audit working papers evidence of management's representations. Palitan na nga natin yung kulay. Permanently, yan. Uy, nagpatong. Ordinarily include in working papers evidence of management representations in the form of summary of oral discussions with management or written representations from management. Uy. Ayan. A written representation is better than oral representation. Alam mo na yan. And can take the form of rep letter from management, a letter from the auditor. Okay. So, itong representation letter from management, yun na nga, from the name itself, galing kay management yan. Tapos may pirma. Okay. Ito naman, letter from the auditor. So, kay auditor galing, outlining the auditor's undertaking of management's representation. Tapos, ah, duly acknowledged and confirmed by the management. So, meron lang doon part na i-acknowledge yung letter ni auditor. Tapos, yun din, ko-confirm, pipirmahan ni management. Then, pwede ring minutes of meetings or signed copy of FS. Okay. Ayan. Basic elements of management representation letter. The auditor would request that it be addressed to the auditor. Ito, take note mo lang. Contain specified information and be appropriately dated and signed. Importante yung signature. A management representation letter would ordinarily be dated at the same date as the auditor's report. Okay, in certain cases, separate representation letter regarding specific transactions or events may also be obtained during the course of the audit or at the date after the auditor's report. Then, management representation letter would ordinarily be signed by the members of management who have primary responsibility for the entity and its financial aspects. Okay. Ayan. Dated and signed. Yun lang. Action if management refuses to provide representations. Such refusal constitutes a scope limitation. Okay. Pag walang, representation. And the auditor should express a qualified or a disclaimer of opinion. Okay, kasi nga may scope limitation. Okay, dito pala merong nawawala lang dito sa handout, no? Iba yung management letter sa management representation letter. Okay, yung management letter kasi galing yun kay auditor. Okay, tinatawag yung laman ng management letter na ML points o management letter points. Okay, yung mga gusto nating i-discuss with management. Okay, itong management representation letter, ah galing 'to kay management, ano. Okay, pero puwede rin kasing nanggagaling kay auditor kaya lang ina-acknowledge nga rin ni management. So, essentially kay management nga ito galing. Management representation letter. Okay, sa practice, tinatawag ito na rep letter. Okay, rep letter. Baka lang malito ka kasi. Iba yung rep letter o yung management representation letter dun sa management letter. Okay? Rep letter versus ML. Okay. Then ito, last na, other procedures that may be deemed necessary. Tada! Last na 'to. Other audit procedures performed at the completion stage of the audit include the following: performing final analytics. Ito na yung huling analytical procedure. So dito na nga tinitingnan na yung reasonableness, no, ng mga transactions o nung mga accounts. Baka masyadong malaki yung increase sa cash o baka masyado namang nag-decrease yung receivables or kung ano man. Okay? Final analytics. Ito na-illustrate na natin dati, no? Sana natatandaan mo pa. I believe naka-Excel tayo doon nung diniscuss natin to. FAR o Final Analytical Review. Next, reviewing the working papers and drawing conclusions on the results of audit procedures performed. Okay, ito, ginagawa to ng kadalasan sa practice, senior audit associate yung gagawa niyan, review ng working papers. Pero yun, nire-review pa rin yan ng managers. Okay. Then, obtaining approval of the client regarding disclosures and any adjustments made to the FS. Next, evaluation of the overall FS presentation. Ito, si partner naman yan. Okay. Yan. Review of other information or documents that contain audited FS and ascertain their consistency. Then, last, communication with management and those charged with governance regarding scope of the audit and other matters of interest to the client. Okay, ayan, audit completion. Okay, so after nito, di-discuss naman natin yung ah, auditor's report o yung audit report. Yan. Baka may question ka pala, unmute ka lang. Okay, mukhang wala naman. So stop natin tong recording.